Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you guys are at. Thank you so much for joining and being with us today. This is a webinar that we have today, and we are RTA, the Fleet Success Company. A little bit about us. We are a modern FMIS built by fleet people for public sector and enterprise fleets that manage their own maintenance. We help you guys cut through the daily chaos, stay organized, and get the clear numbers you need to plan ahead, defend your budget, and lead with confidence, all backed by fast, no-nonsense support from folks who've been in your shoes. And we've got one of those people that have been in your shoes with us today. We'll go ahead and introduce him here in a second. But this is our webinar titled Be the Reason They Kept It In-House, Proving Fleet Value with Data-Driven Confidence. And we are excited to have this webinar with you guys. Our first host here is Nathan Schafer. He is a CAFM certified, and he's an experienced fleet manager. He's been in the business for 25 plus years and has multiple certifications. I mentioned the CAFM as well as the CPFP. He provides client training and support in asset management, fuel use, inventory contracts, and shop operations. And I've had the pleasure to work with Nathan in a few of these areas and see his expertise and his care for clients. So he's also a leader in process improvements, and he's done a lot within the fleet sector. So very grateful to have him with us and his expertise. And then I am Enoch Poston. I also am CFM certified. It was something that I was challenged to do here at RTA, and I'm one of our product managers. I've got 9 years of experience with supporting as well as providing fleet solutions here at RTA, working with many people just like you guys. And I've got a passion for finding solutions to problems that come up, whether that's just in your daily work life within the software or in fleet or whatever it may be. I enjoy finding solutions to problems and so enjoy problem solving. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan here. He's going to go over our agenda, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
All right, so just a few housekeeping items real quick. So during today's session, your questions are encouraged. We will have a Q&A at the end. You feel free to throw those questions in the Q&A or the chat in your toolbar, and we'll get those answered.
Real quick on that one.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Nathan. There is a chat option. Please refrain from the chat and use the Q&A. It's going to be a lot easier for us to organize your questions. So if you put the questions in the Q&A, we can see which ones are answered or unanswered, and we can make sure to get those answered at the end of this session.
Perfect, good point. So the session will be recorded. I think if you request the recording, they will send it out to you. So just let us know if you'd like that. And then obviously your feedback's welcome if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if we could do something better to help you guys, let us know so that helps shape future webinars to get you guys the information you need. And we're always happy to get that feedback. All right, so real quick on the session agenda. So, the title of the webinar is, be the reason to keep your operations in-house, right? I see a lot of organizations get the threats of things being outsourced, right? And the most common one I see is usually the shop operation. You get a lot of these companies that come in and say, oh, we can do the repairs cheaper, we can save you money, things like that. But also in asset replacement, there's a ton of companies out there that can buy things in bulk because of their size, and so they can actually do replacement cheaper or think they can. So they come in and pitch those. And then parts operations is another one where I see that, right? There's some solutions out there with some large part vendors that will come in and do part operations for you as well. So this agenda, right, is we're going to talk about those different areas and really talk about what you should be focused on and how you can help, prove that your operation is efficient and cost effective and keep things in-house. We're also going to talk about customer satisfaction, so some strategies and some things that you can do, because not only is cost effective one of the things that you want to do, but you want to keep your customers happy. So we're going to talk about that. And then again, we're going to have some Q&A at the end. We'll try to leave 10 minutes if possible to give you guys some time to ask questions and answer those questions that come through. All right, so let's dive in. Let's talk about asset replacement. So this one, honestly, there's a lot of things that go into costs that can affect replacement, right? And a lot of shops either overlook these or they artificially do some things with numbers to make themselves look better when they're actually hurting themselves in the long run, especially when it comes to replacement. And we're going to talk about some of that. But the most critical thing that I can share with you guys is like making sure that you get consistent and accurate data and cost collection. This not only affects asset replacement, but it affects the entire operation. And we'll talk kind of how it affects the different sections as we get into them. Um, but with asset replacement, that cost collection is going to go into the life cycle cost, right? And that's kind of how we can determine optimal replacement cycles and things like that. And we'll get into a little bit of that here in just a second. The other one, that's important is standardized coding. And we talk about class codes a lot. We use NAFA class coding here. That's kind of our standard. Um, there's others out there. APWA has one. I think VMRS through the ATA even has a class coding system. You can make your own class coding system, right? Like I'm not, in favor of one or the other. We like NAFA. It's pretty simple and easy to follow, so that's why we use it. But just using a class coding system for your assets is going to get you set apart from a lot of fleets. And why it's important to make sure that you're doing this and doing it correctly is not all, vehicles fit into one class code. So even if you have a half-ton pickup truck, which I see that as a class code in some fleets, not all half-ton pickup trucks are the same. You may have a half-ton pickup truck that runs in the police department or the fire department or, in admin. Not one of those three F-150s should be in the same class code, right? Because they're going to be used differently. So we got to consider use. Their cost, right, is going to be different. And I don't mean the pickup truck or the chassis. I mean its upfit. A police vehicle versus a fire vehicle versus just an admin pickup truck are not going to be upfit the same way, right? So you got to think about use. You got to think about cost because those things really play into when they should be replaced. If I've got a police truck that's running 24/7, we're probably going to replace that every 2 to 3 years, right? Where if an admin vehicle gets used once or twice a week, that thing can probably stick around in the fleet for 5, 7, 10 years, right? Just depends. So class coding and detailed class coding is important. So make sure that if you guys are looking at class codes that you guys are, doing that appropriately. If you've never used class codes before, starting with a half-ton truck class code is better than nothing, right? Because at least it starts to get things grouped together. We can really start to look at some of the costing based on the class codes. But we really want to start looking at, life cycles and replacements and things like that by class code. So getting a little more detailed might be your next step. Okay. And then the next thing, life cycle cost analysis. Doing this to set your replacement cycles is ideal because you're looking at your true cost based on your fleet information. Now, there's a lot of like standard things that people put out, or hey, this state entity decided to do a life cycle cost analysis on their plow trucks, and this is what they came up with. That might be pretty close for you, but unless you're looking at your actual operation and what trucks you're buying and what you're paying for things, like it could be different, right? In a couple of years doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you start to add a couple of years to replacement, it starts to compound, right? Like year over year, it starts to get further and further out. So, life cycle cost analysis is the best way to go through and really determine what your replacement cycle should be, your optimal cycles for your fleet. Okay. Now, if you've never done replacement cycles and you want to start with something standard or that somebody else has done that sounds good to you, it's a great place to start. Okay. I'm not knocking it. However, as you get more into the cost and trusting the data and you start doing this in a better way, doing that life cycle cost analysis or LCA, you might hear it called, is the best way to set that for your fleet because every fleet is going to vary. Okay.
When you have done some training and stuff, Nathan, how efficient, like you mentioned starting somewhere with the asset replacement, right? When you go
Yeah.
in, how many times do you see that like people don't even have any type of replacement plan?
It's what I normally see is we go in and somebody's like, oh, it's when we hit this many miles or when it hits this many years, that's their parameters, which
Hmm.
at least they got something,
Yeah.
right? The problem with doing it in one way like that, or saying, hey, years and mileage, we combine those, that's a good place to start. But the issue is there's so much more to consider,
Hmm.
especially with maintenance cost, right? I may never hit mileage or years. Well, I mean, I'll hit years eventually, but if I'm not looking at maintenance costs, this thing might be in the shop like every 3 days. Like it could be a total lemon. but we're
Okay.
not hitting miles, right? And it's only 3 years old, so we're not replacing it. And it's like, well, we need to start looking at some of that maintenance cost, right? So starting somewhere is better than nothing. And so if you're just saying, hey, all of our police cars we're going to start replacing every 5 years, like that's better than just being like, oh, it's, seems to be breaking down a lot, so we'll replace it. Which some fleets they do that. So, starting somewhere and is good, right? Benchmark what you're doing and then start really making sure that you have good, accurate data. You're getting good cost collection. And then you can start looking at some of the LCA or life cycle cost stuff to refine it, right? And get it better.
Okay.
So fleet is never hey, we fixed this and we're done. It's a continuous improvement, always, right? You're never going to be perfect in every area of a fleet operation. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. So it's always good to start somewhere and really get good, consistent data, right? That's what's going to help us the most. Because if your data is garbage, you're going to have garbage results. So, starting somewhere and then starting to evolve and try to improve is probably the best advice, I can give you in any area in the fleet. But with that life cycle cost analysis, something else to consider that I see a lot of is labor rates, right? Like the shop will be like, oh, our labor rate's $25, right? And a lot of times I'm like, okay, well, why did you set it at that? Well, finance doesn't like us to have it any higher than that, or we're trying to show that we're more cost effective. And it's like, well, but you're not, you know what I mean? Because when we don't set a true, fully burdened rate, um, we're not capturing those costs. So we're not reporting our cost accurately. So when we go to talk about replacement, they go, well, man, you've only spent $10,000 on this vehicle that you want to replace. Why would I replace that? It seems like it's running great. We're not putting a lot of money into it when probably we spent, $70,000 on it, but we're so underinflated on our shop rate that our maintenance costs are way underinflated, right? So underinflating that shop rate actually leads to pushed out replacement cycles, right? Because our life cycle cost looks here when it's actually way out here. So there's so much that goes into all the different areas and how they tie in together, that it really can hurt you when you're trying to look more cost effective, right? So you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So I can't stress enough to make sure that we're actually tracking true accurate cost, right? Calculating our fully burdened rates, setting our markups for our cost, parts and fuel, and we'll talk about the part side. But just making sure that we're really truly understanding what the costs are for each of those different operations and bringing it together so we have a total, right? So, and then also with the asset replacement, it's if I spend $50,000 on a vehicle and I keep it until it's worth zero, that was a $50,000 investment, right? But if I keep it at an optimal cycle and I resell it and I get 20,000 at resale, that was only a $30,000 investment, right? And a lot of people don't think about the resale side. They're like, well, I paid for it, so it was a $50,000 investment. If I keep it till the wheels fall off and it's worth nothing, so what, right? I already assumed that $50,000 investment. So life cycle cost also includes resale, right? Because we want to try to resell something that when it has value. So all things to consider when you guys start looking at asset replacement. And this is why some of those big companies are really, really good at doing some of this stuff, because they'll come in and say, hey, every 4 years you need to replace that, because they're doing this analysis, right? And they're saying, yeah, you're going to spend 60,000 up front, but I'm going to get you 30,000 resale. So it's only costing you 30 grand. So if that sounds really good, right? Leadership's going to be like, oh yeah, let's do that. Well, you can do that too, right? You just got to present it the same way. And a lot of fleets, I think, lack that side of it when it comes to assets. So,
Yeah, you got to
um,
show your story, tell your story with the data, with the numbers, for sure.
yeah, and do it early and often, right? You want to be the one telling your story and understanding your data. You don't want somebody else to come in and know it better than you, because that's when you're going to get in trouble. And then also using the replacement tools that might be in your FMIS, right? I know, in RTA we've got some point systems, that's kind of based on APWA's point system, and we've got some budget projection reporting that we can do and help you guys set some stuff up. I know there's some dashboards coming out to do that stuff as well. So there's a lot of stuff when it comes to asset replacement that you guys should be tracking that ties together, right? And cost accurate data is a big one. Some of the shop operations we're going to talk about here in a minute also are going to come back to this, right? When we start talking about life cycle costs. So it's important to think about. All right, so I talked about, a little bit of this, that replacement dashboard there at the end, but here's some, some reporting and dashboards within, RTA that are really good that will help you guys out. So we have a leadership dashboard. It talks about, fleet age, asset counts, assets due for replacement. This is a big one. Like showing your backlog to leadership can help too, like maybe increase replacement funding. Um, vehicle audit report is a great one for some of that monthly cost. We can watch cost trends. That was a good one I used to run on a monthly basis just to see, you could see those outliers happen real quick if you're watching it, on a consistent basis. So, and it, gets us some good total costs. So I'm going to kick this over to Enoch. He's going to show you a couple examples of these within the RTA product so you guys can see what they look like. And then we'll get over into shop operations.
Yeah, so as Nathan mentioned, like your FMIS should have options available to you for tracking replacement. If you're not sure what they are, please, yeah, go check, make sure that you can see those, and then you know how to utilize them. But diving into RTA, Nathan mentioned our leadership dashboard, and I just want to go over a couple of things here on the leadership dashboard. It will currently show you, yeah, the number of assets you have and what is your median and mean age, as well as your max age, right? So I threw a vehicle in here to show like, hey, we've got a vehicle here that's going to be swaying our age dramatically because it's been in this fleet. And maybe this is one that just hasn't been archived, or maybe you do have an asset here that has been in here for a really long time. So easy way to quickly track what is your average age of your fleet, essentially. This is by facility. We do have different filters at the top where you can specifically drill down to see. So if I wanted to see for a specific class code, I could see what is the average age for just that class code. So this will update all the graphics down below. The other thing in here, right, this would be a fleet that has a huge backlog of assets that need to be replaced. And a lot of times we see this when we go and do consulting with people. We go and look at, hey, let's look at your replacement schedule and what you have in there. And it's always, oh, you got backlog. And so it's always, hey, how do you get rid of that backlog? How are we going to shift that cost over so that you're not paying billions of dollars in year one, but stretch that out over a few years to make it so it's not as big of a burden, right? So this will show you what that first round of replacements looks like. You can as well also get like an asset list so you can dive into the asset. You'll get a table and a grid to see where that asset is specifically so you can see where this data is coming from. And if you do need to go directly to an asset, you can click on the vehicle and it will take you directly to that so you can go and monitor that. The next thing that I wanted to show here, actually, it is going to be in the other tab. I apologize. I need to get rid of a little pop-up here. There we go. We have some reports that we have essentially called some of our top 5 reports here. One of the ones that I wanted to look at with you guys here is your ownership and operational costs. So this will show you your cost per vehicle. And I can scroll over here to see the total details on this, right? So for each vehicle, I can see how much we're spending with fuel, fixed costs, our outside costs, our tires, our labor costs. So you can get those costs and see how you're doing with those. And maybe there's an asset that, hey, you're spending way too much on. And again, this goes back to what Nathan mentioned about making sure that your labor rates are correct. If that labor value is super low, it's going to be hurting you. And you need to make sure that you actually have a fully burdened labor cost in there. So that's the operational costs. And then we do have a few options for replacement. As Nathan mentioned, there is like the APWA replacement scoring report that's using 5 different metrics to help track, hey, what is the priority of these? Is it in excellent condition, good condition? Do we need to consider replacing this? So this is going off of things like age, your maintenance cost, what is the current meter versus projected meter, and giving you a score on your asset to say, hey, these are the ones you need to consider and look at actually replacing based on those factors. And then finally, the other option that we have here is our replacement plan dashboard. And this one's going to be really cool because it's going to help you make sure, hey, am I missing information that I need for my replacement? So again, as a new fleet, I only have 11.6 percent of my assets that actually have a replacement plan. So I either need to go into the asset and set up that plan, go into that class code, set up the plan for the entire class to make sure that I actually have the data that I need to start tracking and getting the correct information. And again, here is that 20-year replacement plan by asset count, right? So again, for a fleet that's going to be a backlog, you're going to have a lot of vehicles that need to be replaced in that first year. We will soon have a graph as well that is going to split this out for you and push those out to give it more of a curve so you're not paying a ton in the first year. But this will show you for each year how much that you should need to expect to pay based on your replacement plan that you have. So lots of good options. Again, you need to make sure that you're utilizing the system and inputting in the data that you need to get those values. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and turn it back over to Nathan. You should be all set there.
Perfect. Thanks, Enoch. So one of the things that I want to say, is with replacement cycles, right? I know a lot of fleets struggle with getting enough money for replacements and things like that. As a fleet leader, like you are really, it's really up to you to make sure you are telling that story and using the data and really understanding the data and how it's coming together, right? So if you struggle with getting replacements, like this stuff can help you. You know what I mean? Like, and we're here to help you guys too, right? We've got a consulting group. We've got a ton of fleet experience at RTA, and we we want to help the industry. Like, we don't care if you use a different FMIS, like that's okay. We're kind of fleet geeks over here, I guess you could say, and we really like talking about this stuff. If you can't tell, I spent 20 minutes talking about replacements. Um, I knew I was going to struggle with timing on this webinar because this is stuff I really like to talk about. But just as a leader in fleet, you really have to know what your data is and making sure you're collecting it in a good way and moving it through up to leadership and telling that story quite often. So we're going to move into shop operations. This one I think is probably where most fleets get in the most trouble because they're just either not coding or collecting enough data or not collecting it properly. And this really does have an effect, out into the rest of the fleet. Because this can really affect replacement. Like I said, if we're not reporting our maintenance and repair costs effectively by having too lower rates or something like that, or just not tracking technician times, right? If I give a technician a job that's supposed to take 3 hours and I don't track how long it actually takes him, like I don't know if we're being efficient, right? That's probably one of the easiest places to start in a shop operation to really start kind of figuring out how efficient you are. And a lot of fleets don't track it, and it surprises me. So again, you're going to see recurring themes as I start to move through this, right? Data collection and coding, super, super important. We should be running reporting, some maybe weekly, at least looking at some of the dashboards weekly, right? Definitely monthly in the shop, because a lot of that trending information will tell us whether or not the technicians are coding things, if our timing's looking good, if they're being efficient. These are all very big things to look at. So again, data collection, coding, making it standardized with VMRS codes. Using those VMRS codes is super important. That helps us know what jobs we're doing, how many times we did that job, right? Also set those standard repair times, right? And using those estimate repair times, again, I can say, hey, this job should take you about 2 hours. If it takes them 2.5 hours, okay, what happened? Did you, rusty bolt, something broke, like what happened, right? Maybe we had an outlier.
Where's a
But
good place to start to get those estimated repair times, Nathan?
there's so many different programs out there, right? Like Mitchell One, I think Chilton puts them out. Some of the OEMs use warranty book times. Even starting there is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
We have some tools in RTA that you can, once you establish some history, you can average it out and apply that. So use
Yeah.
averages. Um, you can go to a neighboring fleet and say, hey, what are you guys using? How are you guys doing this? If they have a similar, fleet makeup, it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
So I would do that.
With those tools too, like it's a good place to start, but a lot of times you can have differences in your region and your fleet, right? So
Yeah.
again, like you mentioned, looking at your history and yeah, like you mentioned, RTA has a tool to do that to look at, hey, what is your average or median time to complete these jobs, and then basing off of that.
Yeah, no, a lot of people want us to provide those for them, and it's really tough, right? Because we have customers all over the country and up into Canada and out into Guam and stuff like that. And it's very tough for us to say that fleet and their repair times is going to be the same as this fleet and those repair times, right? Because you guys might be dealing with snow and salt and this fleet's not, and that changes things. So it's tough for us to try to put standards out there because we just can't do it. So I would use one of those other options. Lean on the experience in the shop. We talked
Hmm.
about the guy Carl in the shop in the last webinar about he knows everything. Carl might be able to go through and look at all these jobs and be like, yeah, in my 40 years of experience, this is about what it should take, right? Even if we're just setting a baseline, that's a good place to start. It's better than nothing. So, establish some of those, start tracking what the technicians are actually taking to do the work so we know if we're being efficient. You know, and I always get flack for this one, if your technicians are doing anything but turning wrenches, they're not being efficient. So if they're walking to the parts room to chase their own parts, and I understand some fleets have to do that, I get it, but that's not efficient, right? If they're if they're getting in a vehicle and driving to the parts store to get their own parts, again, that's not efficient. Um, so effectively, when we're doing that, we're actually pushing our labor rate higher because they're not turning wrenches, they're not being efficient. Steve talks about the spaghetti model of the PM, right? Their PM should be very structured in the way that they do that, and so that they're not walking back and forth or circling the vehicle back and forth a bunch of times, right? Like even things that simple can create inefficiencies, and creating inefficiencies raises that effective labor rate, which means we're not being efficient, right? And our costs go up. So all these little things, it sounds simple, but just, sometimes hiring a parts person and that parts person bringing parts out to the shop can save so much time that it pays for that parts person, right? Like you're effectively not changing anything, but we're making our technicians more efficient. So just little things to start looking at and thinking about, right? And then I would say logging times and parts in real time. That's another thing that I see was a big issue. Especially if we're not using a paperless system where technicians are clocking in the jobs electronically and we're letting the system track times. If they're just writing things down, right, on paper, and then we're inputting it in the system later, or parts guy issued the part and then 3 days later he's like, oh yeah, I need to bill that out, right? You guys are losing so much money you don't even know because it's just things get lost and forgotten about, right? Every time you do inventory, if all of a sudden we have all these parts that are missing, we don't know where they went, they probably got put on a vehicle. We just didn't track it, right? So anytime we can do that stuff real time, you're going to be way more efficient and effective. Okay. So think about some of that stuff. And then we talked about shop labor rates. This one is so huge. I can't stress it enough. And the issue I stress it so much is because it's such a big problem. Like I would say 90% of fleets I go to probably don't have an effective labor rate. It's unreal, right? There's shops out there that do it really well. Shops I've talked to recently are like, hey, we need to calculate our labor rate and we need this and this and that. And then I'm talking to them and I'm like, well, you're not actually calculating it properly in the way you're doing it, but at least you're doing something. So, you got to think about how much time the technicians are actually spending on work, right? We talk about direct time versus indirect time. The direct time that they're turning wrenches is when they're effective, right? That's where we're billing hours. So just like an attorney wants to bill so many hours in a year, so he can have this huge cost. Technicians should be billing a certain amount of time a year, right? If we take 2080 an hours a year is what they should work, and we subtract out vacations and sick time and lunch and paid breaks and all that stuff, right? We shrink down to what their effective billable time should be. 14 to 1500 hours is the generalized kind of time. It varies between fleets, but somewhere in there is how many hours each technician should direct bill every year. If your technicians aren't hitting that, they're not being efficient, right? So anytime they're below that, it's going to push your labor rate up because we have to make up the cost somehow, right? So we have to increase the labor rate. So this is why I talk about, tracking efficiencies and those technicians. It's such a huge deal, and that's part of it. So that's probably one thing where I see a lot of fleets kind of miss an opportunity, right? Is not tracking what the actual times are. And they go, well, we're just going to bill out what the book time is. But we're missing opportunities there too. If a
Yeah.
technician, think about the idea of like if a technician, right, if you give him an electrical job and it's supposed to be 3 hours and he takes 6 hours, we don't know it took him 6 hours. How do we ever identify if that technician needs more training, right? Needs more help? Maybe he doesn't have the right tools. You know what I mean? Like we can't identify those issues if we're not tracking this stuff. there may be a myriad of reasons why it's taking them longer than the standard repair time to do something. And it may not be just them being lazy, right? A lot of shops take and technicians take that stuff personal. They're like, oh, you're just, big brother, you don't trust me. Has nothing to do with that. I want to make sure that the shop's effective so we all have a job, right? The whole idea is this getting outsourced. Because if one of those outsource companies comes in and makes this presentation to leadership, right, they're going to say, oh, well, this is our labor rate. This is how efficient we are. This is how many direct billable hours we make sure that we do. Like, if they're tracking all this stuff and doing all this stuff and you're not, who's going to win, right? So I can't stress the importance enough of tracking this stuff and keeping a good log of these things, especially if
Yeah.
you're in the government space. One city council member brings up this idea and it catches fire, and I've had it happen, right? Working in government, it just takes, you know, I don't want to throw out company names, but we had companies stop at the mayor's office and be like, "Hey, this is how we can save you money." And then all of a sudden, I'm getting calls from the mayor's office of, "Hey, you should meet with these people." And I'm like, I mean, I will because you asked me to, but it's not going to go anywhere. Why didn't it go anywhere? Because I could prove we were being efficient. So it's important. All
Yeah, I
right.
mean, I remember when Mark Canton, when he first joined RTA and he was starting to look at some of customers' data, I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many earfuls I heard from him about how, yeah, people's labor rates are way too low and how they
Yeah.
need to be, yeah, using all the metrics to track what that labor rate should be. Like, yeah, your admin and your overheads and everything need to be brought in to make sure you're calculating that labor rate correctly. So,
Yeah, and I get a lot of the pushback when I'm like, well, why is your rate $50 an hour? And it's like, oh, finance said we can't do it, or they say this. And I said, okay, well, have you ever calculated what your rate should be based on all this
right.
stuff, and like presented that to them? No. Well, why not? I don't think they'll listen to me. I'm like, listen, man, if you go in there with all the data behind you and present it and say, this is why we should be here, they're
Yeah.
probably going to listen to you, right? But,
I mean, and if you don't ever talk to them, they're not ever going to listen. Yeah, for sure.
exactly. Yeah. So that's a big excuse I get is finance won't let us, or
Yeah.
the other one is, well, I'm trying to show that we're more cost effective. And I'm like, well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot here because this is twofold. And I get it, right? Like some fleets are just kind of stuck and people won't let them change things, and I get it. But man, it's so much better if you can just kind of break through that. This is the way we've always done it, and present your case with real data.
Hmm.
It's amazing the things you can get, when you go present things that way. So anyway, all right, here's a few reports, dashboards, within the RTA system that I'm gonna have Enoch show you guys here in a minute. The repair history by VMRS is a great one. This is another great monthly report I liked. It showed how many times we were doing the job by VMRS code, and then gave me the labor time, right? And it gave me a percentage of how much time in the shop we were spending there. This is another great one to watch trends, right? Because if all of a sudden charging systems jumps up, it's like, okay, why are we all of a sudden spending time in charging systems? Like, did the weather change and we started losing batteries, or did we have some other issue going on? So this is a good one. That one's actually in a dashboard now too, which is super helpful. And then, we've got some M&R dashboards, direct versus indirect. Again, shows how our technicians are billing, efficiency rates, again, on those technicians to see how well they're doing with the times we're giving them. And then cost by VMRS. This one's a big one too. If we have a VMRS code for light bulbs and all of a sudden it's our highest ranked thing and we're spending 100 grand a year in light bulbs, it's like, what's happening? Right now, I'm being facetious, but just saying it throws those things out there so you can see that stuff. So go ahead, Enoch. I'll let you guys, or let you show them.
Okay. Let me pull this up here and give it a second so that it loads on people's side. So the first one that I've got pulled up here is, yeah, one of the ones you mentioned here is the direct versus indirect labor, right? As you mentioned, ideally you want to try and have everybody at 100%. Obviously, it's going to be very hard to have 100% direct labor. So yeah, I've got some here of like the 99.53. They're spending most of their time on that labor. And maybe this is a shop where you've got somebody who's like a part technician, a parts person, so they're doing some indirect stuff at that time. But yeah, you want to try and avoid this in a normal shop with all your technicians. Again, if they're trying to go get their own parts or if they're running to the parts room a lot, you're going to see a lot of this either lost time or indirect time that they have. So you want to be able to track that. The other one we have, I won't dive too far into, is efficiency. So essentially, yeah, based on how much time they were supposed to spend on the job, how much time did they actually spend on that job? And then I'm going to jump over here to a different tab. One of the ones you mentioned as well is that total maintenance cost by VMRS, and I completely agree. This is going to be a huge report and see where are you spending the most money. So this fleet, like they're spending a ton of money on batteries. Why is that? Are we buying a low brand battery? Do we need to change that? Or are we not getting like cores back and decreasing the cost of those? What is the reason for that? So I can analyze what is that M&R cost by VMRS code. Um, and again, I can dive into some of the data here by looking at some of these different tabs to look at by asset. Maybe there's a specific asset that is the reason for that high spend, and we can look at replacing that asset or whatnot. So those are the some of the big reports on that is yeah, looking at that VMRS cost and description. Um, I feel like I'm missing one more that I was going to show here. I believe it was in here. Maybe I'm forgetting. I apologize here. Yeah, here it is. There's that repair history by VMRS as well. So this is going to be similar to the other one. It's just it kind of expands it a little bit for you. And again, you do have your filters so you can sort by specific year to see if you're trending in the right direction, right? Maybe you're making improvements and you want to see, hey, just in the last year, what does this look like? And that's going to change and adjust your data so you can see, hey, okay, yeah, we're spending more on tires. So great reports and great options, and you have some good options for filtering and sorting to make sure that you're seeing that data how you need to. Anything else you want to see here? Otherwise, yeah, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Nathan.
Yeah, you can hand it back.
Okay.
One quick story, that repair history by VMRS report, kind of before dashboards were super popular with RTA, it was one that I was running a lot, monthly, for sure. And one of the things that we picked up on by running that monthly is, again, trending, right? Like I'm watching numbers, I'm seeing things. Again, all of a sudden, batteries spiked, and I was like, well, that's weird because we've been kind of stable with batteries. So what changed? It wasn't a turn of seasons to where, it gets cold or gets hot and starts taking batteries out. So, I go down to the shop and I start asking questions, shop manager, parts people, and I say, hey, looks like we're doing batteries a lot more. What's kind of going on? And shop manager's like, yeah, I don't know. Like all of a sudden it just seems like, we're getting 6 months out of a battery where we used to get, 2 to 3 years, so it was really odd. And so looking at that, it made me kind of start questioning the vendor. So I called the vendor, very popular vendor. They were giving us 2 year free replacement, even in emergency vehicles, right? And so we were just doing really well with batteries for once in a while. I called them and I said, hey, did you guys change something with the batteries? They look the same, they got the same stickers, but like all of a sudden we're just having issues with batteries. And he's like, yeah, we actually changed who we're buying them from. Like we changed manufacturers, on the back end. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So, you know, repair history by VMRS and watching trends isn't always an issue in the shop. It could be an issue with the vendor or the parts you're buying. We ended up changing and going to a different vendor for batteries after that because I couldn't get more than 6 months out of a battery, in a police car, and that kind of sucks, right? We change batteries every 6 months. It's not fun. So we ended up going to a different vendor, getting a little bit better, you know, time out of some batteries for those police cars and stuff. But yeah, some of this stuff can help you with vendor management too, right? It's not always going to be a shop issue or a technician issue. It could be issues with specs. It could be issues with operators. It could be issues with a lot of things. Um, but you'll never know, right? Unless you're running this information and you're collecting the data and you're doing your due diligence and you are watching it and understanding it. So again, it's a big thing to make sure you guys are watching this stuff. All right, let's jump over to parts operations, right? This one I'm starting to see more and more get outsourced. And I'll be honest, we used an outsourced parts vendor at the city. Um, and we did this because I'll be honest, I think parts is probably one of the biggest headaches of every fleet manager's, day. It's a very complex operation. There seems to be a lack of really good industry training for parts people. If you got a good parts person and they understand the operation, they're like worth their weight in gold. But you just don't see it. And I don't know why we lack that, but it just seems like it's hard to find really, really good parts people. Now there's okay parts people, but you'll see a lot of, people will come from, the Napas, the AutoZones, the O'Reillys, and they'll come in to work in a government operation or a corporate operation to work the parts counter, and they don't understand the full back end of the operation. They understand how to look a part up and hand it to you, but that's it, right? That's kind of where it stops. And I think we lack some of the training on the deeper side of the operation. So, proper inventory management is a big, big issue, right? The biggest part of that I see is not managing obsolescent or slow moving parts. So, you got parts sitting on the shelf that have been there for 30 years. We never got rid of them when we got rid of that vehicle. They don't even fit anything that's even manufactured anymore. And now we're just going to throw it away, right? If we manage the obsolescence or the slow moving parts by saying, hey, every 6 months or every 12 months, like I want to look and see how our parts turn is moving. How are we issuing things? You can start to see those trends, right? We start to see the trends where things aren't moving. We start getting rid of it, right? We start selling it back to the vendor and getting money back. If we don't, all of a sudden, 30 years later, I'm stuck with this inventory that's worth 20 grand and now I just got to throw it away. So we're wasting a ton of money by not managing that. The other side of it is proper stock levels, right? It's either I stock too much or I don't stock enough. So constantly having those stock outs, one of the biggest technician complaints I always get is we never have parts. I try to do a PM and I go to the parts counter or I request the parts and they never have them. So I have to wait. Again, if the technician's waiting on parts, he's not being efficient, right? So that's another issue with proper stock levels. I don't have enough stock to keep the operation moving. Um, the flip side of that is, well, I know we use this filter, so I order 3 pallets of it at a time. And it's like, wow, I just made a $60,000 investment to have 7 pallets back there that are going to sit there and take up a bunch of space. I probably didn't need to order that much, right? Call the vendor, I can get it in a couple days. I probably didn't need to stock, 2 or 3 pallets. And I've seen both sides of that. Honest to God operations, I've seen it. It's crazy. So we want to make sure that we're managing that proper stock level. We always want to have just enough stock, right? Not too much, not too little. We don't want to overinvest. That ties up funds. If I overinvest and forget about it and I'm not managing slow moving, then all of a sudden I have this stock I can't use, right? So proper inventory management is huge. Okay. Other things that we should be watching and looking at is fill rate. How often are we filling the order for parts versus having to order? Okay. Parts markups. Again, knowing your true cost. If you're not using parts markups, you're losing money. Okay. If I bring a part in for $5 and I apply it to a work order for $5, I just lost money, right? Because I didn't account for my parts people's wages. I didn't account for the storage of those parts. I didn't account for the paperwork to order those parts, right? That's all costs that you guys have to think about. Okay. And it's the same with the shop operation, right? We have to include when we start looking at labor rates, we have to include, how much is our utility bill? That supports the shop operation. That's part of your labor rate, or it should be, because we need to bill for that to get the cost back. It's the same thing at your house, right? If you think about your fleet operation just like a business. Okay. No business that's for profit is not going to make sure that they're not recouping their operating cost, right? Or overhead. You guys probably heard those terms. Okay. Parts markups is how you cover that parts overhead, right? Your parts people's wages, the shop or the parts room space, right? For the rental, utilities, the paperwork to process that stuff. Uh, you know, all that stuff should go into parts markups. Okay. Parts markups can vary, right? You could be from 15% to 35%. It just depends. You can calculate what your costs are, your overhead costs are, and split that out. But that's another thing you guys should be calculating. Same with fuel, right? If you're buying fuel at $1.99 a gallon and you're selling it for $1.99 a gallon at the pump, you're losing money. Okay. If we're paying our technicians $25 an hour and that's the labor rate I'm billing, you're losing a lot of money. Get the idea? We have to account for that overhead or those costs. That's what markups do. They help us recoup that cost. Now, I'm not saying, in a city or government operation, a lot of that I get is, well, we don't actually charge back the customers, right? We don't operate like that. It's like, I understand. We don't have to bill them back to know what our costs are. We should know what our true costs are, because when the parts vendors come in and say, hey, we can outsource your parts for this much money and this is the overhead we charge and this and that, and you walk in and go, I have no idea what our overhead is. Again, what do you think's going to happen? They're going to start looking at this other one that knows the numbers. Okay. You guys got to know this stuff. It's going to help you tremendously. Parts room security. This is another huge one. How many people have parts people and the technicians still walk in the parts room to get their own parts? This one blows my mind, right? It's like the first thing I did when I took over the city. Like I sat there and watched the parts room door open, just wide open, just, got the cinder block in front of it. Technicians just in and out all day. The other thing that blew my mind is other city employees coming in through the back door of the parts room, just willy-nilly, right? All these people in the parts room. I'm like, we got $100,000 in parts inventory in here and we have no security. So that's a huge one. Okay. If you have a parts person, they should be issuing parts. What do we have them for? I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a fleet and I sit and watch their operations. The parts guy's sitting in the parts room. Technicians are still walking in and getting their own parts. I'm like, what's that guy doing? Oh, he's doing this or he's doing that. And it's like that's not the job description of a parts person, right? Like they should be issuing parts to the shop. That's the operation. That's what they should be doing. So parts from security and making sure your parts people are actually parts people, big deal. Okay. What do you think, Enoch? Anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
All right. All right. So a couple of reports and dashboards. Again, keeping an eye on that fill rate, like how effective is our parts room? How often are we filling the request for parts versus ordering? Parts with no usage is a good number. Again, obsolescence or low usage. And then vendor management with work order status. This is a great one. We got work order statuses within RTA. I can make one that says, waiting on parts. I can track how long that work order has been in that status. This is such a huge, helpful thing for vendor management. It's amazing. And then parts usage, right? We got parts usage reports. We can kind of see, where the parts are going, what they're being used for, where they're going. So it's just some great information to help you guys out, keep track of this stuff, right? So Enoch, I'll hand it over to you, let you show them some of the stuff.
Should be loading there. So this first one here is, yeah, our parts dashboard. And just to quickly explain with RTA, right, we have some dashboards that we've grouped together and some of the metrics that should be important for that grouping. But any of these little small dashboards or widgets is what we call them. You can create your own dashboard from it to get the widgets that you need. For this parts dashboard, though, um, the first thing you'll see is your work orders that are waiting for parts, right? You need to make sure your availability is up. So being able to track and make sure, hey, do I have any? And being able to then click on and see which ones those are to make sure that those get filled. He mentioned your parts fill rate. You can see what that is right there on top, what the total inventory value is that I have in my back room. And then the parts gain loss report is going to be calculating based off of, yeah, what you purchased it at and what it went out for on the work order, right? So those markups that Nathan was mentioning. And then you got your part usage. This is year to date. So we can see, hey, year to date, how many parts or what are my parts that I'm using a lot of? And I can help use this to track, hey, do I need more on my shelf? Are we running low? We're out of these because we're ordering too many of them. And I can go through and track these. I can do it by part number, part name, and then I do as well have the grid list where I can look and see the total data, those transaction dates, and where that data is coming from. The other side of this is that no usage or the low usage parts, and what their current count is on inventory, right? So I've got a couple of parts here that I have a ton of on hand, and they haven't used these, right? So these are essentially, yeah, just wasting space and wasting money in your back room. So you need to make sure you're tracking these and seeing as they're coming through. Hey, I haven't used these in the last year. Is this something that we still need? Do we need to start reducing the number of on hand on our shelf, start selling those back to the vendor, get some money back for those before they become completely obsolete and nobody's going to want them, right? So some great information on those parts dashboard to help keep track of and keep the parts people on their toes, right? There's lots of information they can glean just from these few reports that are in here. Some other stuff that I won't really dive into just based on time. We have the ability as well to display like a screen in your shop to be able to see, hey, where are the parts requests? Where are they at? Are they ready? And so that way the technician doesn't have to waste time by, yeah, going to that parts room asking, hey, are my parts here? It'll be right there for them. They can keep working until they see that those are ready. So lots of great options to help make sure your part operations are running smoothly.
Yeah, that's a great point, bringing in the parts request, because that's a great one, right? If the technician's got his tablet or something right there at his workstation, he can request parts. Parts people see it, they can take action on it and send that information back to them so they kind of know where that's at. So that's another great one. All right, I have it back. Did you stop sharing?
Yes, you should have that. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we are getting close on time. I knew we would. I can't help it. I'm passionate about this stuff. I love to talk about it, but I'm going to get through some of this last stuff so I can leave some time for some questions. Stakeholder satisfaction, we talked about this, you know, fixing vehicles and making sure we're fixing them reliably and cost effective is just one part of a fleet operation. We want to make sure the customers are happy too, right? And our customers are the people that bring us the vehicles. So whether it's the police department, the long haul trucking side of our trucking organization, whoever it is, if they're bringing a vehicle to us, they're a customer, right? So one of the things that is super important, in my opinion, is annual surveys, at least annual surveys. More often is probably better. Um, this is a great way to kind of survey our customers, find out what we do well, what we don't do well, so that we can make improvements, right? It's not just all about the negative feedback, but we want to know how we can improve and do things better. Okay. We do have a tool built into RTA for this in a couple different ways, which just sends out a quick one question thing after a work order gets closed to whoever the contact is for that customer or the vehicle if you have those set up. And it's just like, hey, how was the service today? How can we do better, right? It gives them the opportunity to respond to that. So there are tools within RTA to help do that. Doing an annual survey outside of that is also a good idea. Gave us a lot of really good feedback and ways that we can improve our operation when I was with the city. It was something I always looked forward to because, good, bad, and ugly, I wanted to hear it so we could get better, right? We're not perfect. Another great option is a fleet advisory board. Have a customer or an individual from each of your different customer departments or whatever you guys have, sit on this advisory board and meet quarterly, meet monthly, whatever you want to do. Just get together in a room and talk about, what are their challenges with their operations. Maybe they have a vehicle that's not spec'd correctly and you have no idea, right? But if you start doing these advisory boards, you're open to that feedback. You can start having those open discussions. It really will change things for you, I promise, if you're not doing it already. And then end user participation in specs, right? Every time we demoed something or we were looking at changing something, I always got the user departments and the actual operators involved. I would bring them down and say, hey, we're going to demo this piece of equipment. You guys are the ones that use it. Come climb on it. Come play with it. Come see how it's different than what you're currently using. Is it better? Is it worse? Because we've got to change something, right? It was crazy how much better that went when I started involving them. They started getting the vehicles they wanted. They actually felt like they could use. They felt like they had a voice in it. They started taking care of the vehicles better because they felt like they had some ownership in the decision. It was mind blowing how much it changed things for us. So just consider that stuff, right? It will help you guys tremendously. All right. So that kind of wraps up the agenda items. So I always want to throw out the Fleet Success book. This is something that Josh and a couple other members of RTA wrote a few years ago. It is based on the 4 pillars of fleet success. It is hands down a great book to read if you've never read it. It really just kind of leans into all the different things in fleet and how the 4 pillars help kind of manage those things. You can scan the QR code you guys see there, request a free copy. Facundo, one of our people here, former fleet manager, does a what do they call that? Book club. So if you're into reading and then talking about it, see if you can find Facundo on LinkedIn and hook up with his book club. It's pretty awesome. You can also go to our website and request a copy of that as well. We'll send it out to you. The Fleet Success Show podcast. If you listen to podcasts, you can get episodes of this kind of anywhere you listen to those. Spotify, Apple, that kind of stuff. Scan the QR code here. You can find those. YouTube. It's a great podcast. Sometimes we talk about all kinds of stuff, right? It could be the 4 pillars of fleet success. It's a wide range of things. It's not always fleet. Sometimes it's leadership, right? So, get on there, check it out, give it a listen. And then as we both kind of mentioned, we have a ton of experience here at RTA in the fleet industry, over 450 years of fleet experience. You can see the pictures there of the people with fleet backgrounds up there now. So we got quite a collection. We are here for the industry. It's not just about RTA customers. If you need anything, please reach out, right? We got the consulting group, can do full-on consulting work for you. You can reach out to any of us via email or phone call, and we'd be happy to help you with whatever your challenges or struggles are.
Thank you so much for registering and being here. We appreciate it. We're very passionate about fleet and helping you guys have success. That's what we're about here is helping fleet succeed. So again, thank you so much.